The air in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton in downtown Chicago was thick with the smell of old money, expensive perfume, and the bitter truth I was about to serve. My brother Michael stood under the glittering chandeliers, a glass of champagne in one hand and a gold-plated award in the other, celebrating what everyone present, our family, the employees, and our parents, James and Eleanor, believed was his greatest triumph. Successfully piloting our manufacturing company, Sterling Dynamics, into its most profitable year ever. What they didn't know was that Michael's success had been secured by stealing $2 million from the company coffers, money he had funneled into a desperate private venture after Dad handed him the reins. That night, Michael decided to punctuate his victory speech by throwing public shade at the one person I cared about most, my daughter. My brother mocked my daughter, Sarah, right in front of a room full of people, after stealing $2 million from the company I helped build. And the satisfied smirk on his face was so repellent, so deeply entitled, that I felt a cold, clear resolve crystallize in my chest. He choked, literally, when he realized he was about to lose the entire company to me. The insult was perfectly tailored to cut the deepest. Michael, basking in my father's approving glow, tapped the microphone. And finally, he slurred slightly, the cheap champagne catching up with him. I want to wish a certain young lady luck. My niece, Sarah, she's off to college next fall. State school, I hear. You know, it takes real courage to choose a college that doesn't require a trust fund or, a stellar GPA. I always tell Evelyn she should have aimed higher, but hey, maybe she'll meet a nice guy there who can afford to bail out her future ventures. He let out a loud, theatrical laugh, looking directly at me, daring me to react. The joke, of course, was twofold. It was a cruel dig at my daughter's hard-earned acceptance to the University of Michigan, which was dismissed as a consolation prize, and a low-blow reference to my messy, financially constrained divorce from my ex-husband, which Michael still loved to bring up. The worst part was seeing my parents smile faintly, a brief flicker of agreement passing between them, the casual cruelty that had defined my life suddenly aimed at my 18-year-old girl. The air around me didn't just feel suffocating, it was choking on the sweet, pungent stench of hypocrisy. I stood near the back of the grand ballroom, an anonymous, cool presence in a $15,000 Saint Laurent gown and a diamond watch that cost more than Michael's whole monthly salary. I was the quiet, competent one who had spent 2 decades doing the actual work, while Michael was the loud, failing one who got all the credit, the checks, and the fawning approval. To them, the glittering success of Sterling Dynamics, which now spanned multiple states and brought in 9 figures of revenue, was the natural result of Michael's vision. They conveniently forgot that my vision, honed at MIT, was the blueprint that built the whole modern operation. For 20 years, I had been the family's ghost engine. In 2008, when the company was on the brink, I engineered the entire automation process that reduced waste by 30%. Michael presented the initiative to the board and branded it, without a shred of irony, the Michael Reed Efficiency Overhaul. I spent 3 years developing the proprietary logistics software that landed our largest ever government contract. Michael simply told my mother I was helping him with his spreadsheets and took an exorbitant bonus. Their dismissal wasn't passive, it was an active, constant form of cruelty, a slow, draining validation deficit. That dynamic, my competence versus his entitlement, was why I was here tonight. My father, James, had insisted I fly in from New York, not out of love, but because he wanted me to witness firsthand Michael's supposed superiority in this final, dramatic display. My mother, Eleanor, had greeted me earlier by asking, "Evelyn, dear, still doing that logistics consulting? Are you sure David, my husband, is happy supporting that hobby?" It was the casual, effortless brutality they had perfected over the years, always implying that despite my 7-figure income and my firm's global clientele, I was still the little sister who needed bailing out. My composure was absolute, honed by years of surviving their slights. They thought they had reduced me to a weeping mother, ready to defend her child with empty words. They didn't see the Evelyn Reed who commanded multi-million-dollar contracts from Fortune 100 companies from a penthouse office overlooking Central Park. They were applauding their son for running a medium-sized factory while my firm, Nexus Global, was restructuring the supply chains for half the eastern seaboard. Yet in their eyes, I was still that vulnerable young woman they could control with a condescending joke and a subtle glance of disapproval. But when Michael, reeking of arrogance, aimed his venom at Sarah, mocking her hard-won acceptance to a top university, he made the final, unforgivable mistake. He attacked the one pure, self-made thing I had ever truly created. That insult, layered upon 2 decades of neglect and theft, didn't shatter me. It clarified my purpose. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from the cold, focused adrenaline of action. I was no longer an angry daughter. I was a CEO about to execute a hostile takeover. My face felt like marble because every muscle was dedicated to control, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy the catastrophic truth I held in my hand. They thought they had me beaten, but they were playing checkers while I was holding the key to their entire corporation. This was not a moment for tears. It was the designated time for the execution of the contract. But I wasn't weeping. I felt the hot, familiar sting of the injustice, but years of high-stakes corporate negotiation had taught me to channel rage into precision. They thought they had won, but I was holding the eject button. My daughter's future, her hard work, was not a punchline. That moment changed everything from a slow burn of revenge to a full-scale surgical operation. Michael, sensing my stillness, approached me, his smile wide and predatory. "What's the matter, Evie? Too much for you? Maybe you should stick to your little New York job and leave the real money to the men." He put his hand on my shoulder, a gesture of patronizing finality. I smoothly shrugged off his hand and stepped forward, taking the microphone from his grip, the sudden movement silencing the scattered, nervous applause. The entire room, full of Midwestern industry figures and company staff, focused on me. "That was quite a toast, Michael," I said, my voice cool, clear, and perfectly amplified. I didn't raise my voice. I simply spoke with the authority that comes from being absolutely right and having an airtight legal defense. "You're right that Sarah needs money for her tuition next year, and she deserves every cent of it, earned on her own merit, something you clearly know nothing about." I paused, reaching into the inner pocket of my blazer. I didn't pull out a document. I pulled out a simple, high-end USB stick, the kind that encrypts itself with military-grade security. I held it up between 2 fingers, a tiny, unassuming piece of plastic, but one that contained the complete breakdown of Michael's financial fraud. "You mentioned real money, Michael," I continued, turning to the audience, my eyes scanning the faces of our loyal employees, the ones who had dedicated decades to Sterling Dynamics. "It takes real money to run a company this size, money that you seem to think belongs in your personal offshore account. And it takes real courage to come here and throw shade at an 18-year-old girl after you stole over $2 million from this company, money you fraudulently claimed was for raw materials from your Delaware shell corporation, Mandel Logistics." The chatter in the room instantly died. My father, James, surged forward, his face pale and panicked. "Evelyn, what is this nonsense? Shut up right now!" I ignored him, my gaze locked onto Michael, whose face, just seconds ago flushed with triumph, had gone stark white. "I'm afraid I can't shut up, Dad, because the only thing Michael managed to do successfully this year was commit corporate fraud, which, according to the shareholder control agreement of 2015, automatically triggers a forced buyout of his controlling shares at a severely discounted pre-fraud valuation." I looked at Michael, who was now stumbling backward, looking like he'd been hit by a truck. "I didn't just take back the $2 million you embezzled, plus interest, Michael. I took the company too." I stepped down from the stage and handed the USB stick and a thick, blue legal binder, the ownership transfer agreement, signed, sealed, and funded, to Dad's chief operations officer, Linda, a fiercely loyal woman who had secretly supplied me with the final paper trail. Michael, seeing the finality of the move, seeing the company he thought was his, completely snatched away, let out a choked sound, a gasp of pure, primal disbelief, and had to grab the edge of the nearest table to keep from collapsing on the polished marble floor. I had the last laugh, and it was devastatingly loud. The collapse wasn't physical. It was the total implosion of Michael's entire fabricated identity. His knees buckled and he stumbled back against the pristine white linen of a cocktail table, sending a cascading waterfall of champagne flutes crashing to the floor. The sound was deafening, a fitting soundtrack to the wreckage of his life. My father, James, lunged for the microphone shouting, "There's been a mistake! This is a family matter!" But the damage was done. Linda, the COO, a woman who had seen the company through 3 generations of poor management decisions and who looked like she'd just been handed the keys to the kingdom, held the blue binder firmly, the expression on her face a mix of vindication and professional calm. For me, the immediate shock of the situation was already a memory. I was already calculating the logistics of the transition. The revenge wasn't born in that moment, but in a lifetime of slow, painful, calculated neglect and abuse. To understand the depth of that devastation on Michael's face, you have to rewind 18 years, to the day I abandoned my true destiny to save the family name. I was 22, freshly graduated from MIT with a degree in industrial engineering and a dream job waiting at a major consulting firm in Boston. I was the intellectual powerhouse of the family, the one destined for a life of innovation and high-tech efficiency, the one who didn't need the family business. Michael, 4 years older, had floated through life, accumulating debt and mediocre arts degrees, perpetually funded by Mom and Dad's unwavering belief in his potential. Sterling Dynamics, founded by my grandfather, was at the time a small, struggling precision machining and fabrication company, limping along in a heavily industrial Chicago suburb. The crisis hit right as I was packing. Dad suffered a severe, unexpected heart attack. He survived, but the business, already weak, nearly failed without his oversight. Michael? He was in South America on a spiritual retreat. Mom, Eleanor, called me in Boston, not to ask for help, but to demand it. "Evelyn, you need to come home," she said, her voice brittle. "Michael is too sensitive for this kind of stress. You're the practical one. Your job can wait. Your father built this for his son, and you need to protect Michael's future." The phrase Michael's future was the familiar knife twist. My future was always secondary, a temporary distraction from my real purpose, supporting Michael. I had secured a loan from my college savings, paid off a crucial supplier, and, with a heavy heart, declined the Boston job. I flew back to Chicago, intending to stay 6 months, just until Dad recovered and Michael returned. 6 months became 15 years. I didn't just save Sterling Dynamics. I revolutionized it. I applied my MIT-honed industrial engineering skills to overhaul the entire manufacturing process. I implemented just-in-time inventory, secured lucrative government contracts by improving quality control, and expanded the product line into specialized, high-margin components for the aerospace industry. I took a failing regional shop and turned it into a mid-sized, nationally recognized firm with over 200 employees. I was the engine, the mind, and the muscle. My reward? Public dismissal and private servitude. While I was clocking 80-hour weeks in the factory, managing supply chain issues, and negotiating contracts, Michael finally returned from his retreat and was immediately appointed Director of Business Development, a fancy title for a job that mainly involved taking clients out for expensive steak dinners, paid for on the company card. When I asked for a fair salary and commensurate equity, Dad looked surprised. "But Evelyn, this is for the family," he'd say, waving his hand dismissively. "You're a minority shareholder. Michael will be the majority owner when I retire. He's the one who will carry the name. You're good at the details, dear. Let Michael handle the vision." The worst betrayal wasn't financial, it was the constant emotional invalidation. They didn't see my brilliance. They saw my labor. My entire identity was wrapped up in being the self-sacrificing, unacknowledged support system. My marriage fell apart because my ex-husband couldn't stand the sight of my parents openly favoring Michael, even at our own wedding. When I finally left the business 5 years ago, exhausted but leaving behind a finely tuned, highly profitable machine, I took only a 15% minority equity stake and my hard-earned savings, establishing my logistics consultancy, Nexus Global, in New York City. I thought I was free. I thought I had moved on. I had built a successful firm, met David, a brilliant corporate lawyer who truly respected my mind, and was raising Sarah, my daughter, to be independent and strong. Michael, of course, was immediately promoted to CEO by Dad. I laughed it off, assuming the company was now his problem. The problem, however, came looking for me. The devastating discovery occurred just 3 months prior, on a rainy afternoon in my high-rise office in Midtown Manhattan. Sarah, my bright, resilient daughter, had been accepted into UMich, her dream school, and we were looking over the financial aid documents. Sarah qualified for some aid, but we still needed significant financing. When she applied for a private loan, the application was inexplicably denied. "Mom, they flagged something about a major change in my grandparents' financial stability," Sarah said, looking worried. "They said their net worth estimate dropped by almost 50% in the last year, and they require more collateral, which doesn't make sense, since Sterling Dynamics is booming." That moment, the look of confusion on my daughter's face felt like a physical blow. It was one thing to hurt me. It was another thing entirely to threaten my daughter's future. Michael had messed with the wrong woman. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I didn't trust Dad's explanations. I leveraged my old credentials, called up Linda, the COO, and asked her to quietly run a forensic audit on the books from the last fiscal year. Linda, who had also been relegated to the sidelines by Michael's mismanagement, was loyal to the company, not the owner. She knew the business was running on the foundation I had built, not Michael's vision. Linda sent me a cryptic email with an attachment labeled Vendor Invoice 7,421. That invoice was for a $2.1 million payment to a company called Mandel Logistics for high-grade titanium. The amount was massive, nearly 20% of our annual material budget, and the purchase had drained our capital reserves. Using my Nexus Global resources, which included sophisticated legal and financial database access, I started digging. A quick search of Mandel Logistics revealed it was a shell corporation, registered in a murky Delaware jurisdiction, with no physical presence, no employees, and a single anonymous principal. A more advanced search, utilizing my network of corporate espionage contacts, a perk of M&A Consulting, led me to the beneficial owner. The name on the offshore account tied to Mandel Logistics was Michael James Reed, $2 million. Stolen. Right after Dad promoted him. Michael had used the company's booming success, my success, as cover for a massive, audacious embezzlement scheme, essentially using Sterling Dynamics as his personal ATM to fund some unknown, desperate venture. That was the third and most final seed of my revenge. I immediately called my husband David, a partner at a top-tier corporate law firm. Known for his cutthroat, successful handling of hostile takeovers and complex M&A deals. David was a New Yorker to the core, sharp, efficient, and possessing an almost frightening grasp of corporate law. "David, I need the nuclear option," I told him that evening, pacing the length of our spacious apartment overlooking Central Park. "Michael stole $2.1 million. I have the wire transfers, the dummy corporation, and the signed invoice. I want to execute a hostile takeover. I don't want to press criminal charges. I want to take his entire inheritance, his control, and his reputation. I want the company." David, ever the pragmatist, saw the perfect opportunity. "Criminal charges are messy, Evie. We go civil, we go corporate. You have a 15% stake. He has 51%. Dad has 34%. We need Dad's shares, or we need a contractual loophole that overrides majority ownership." "I have the loophole," I said, a dark smile touching my lips. "Remember the shareholder control agreement of 2015? I insisted on updating it before I left. Michael signed it without reading the fine print. Section 4.3. C states that any shareholder proven to be involved in gross financial mismanagement, embezzlement, or financial malfeasance automatically forfeits their right to control, and their shares can be bought out by the remaining shareholders at a discounted fair market valuation based on the pre-mismanagement audit. David's eyes lit up. That's beautiful, Evie. You planted a landmine years ago, knowing he'd step on it. We execute the buyout. We file a legal demand for an immediate, independent audit using your evidence. We offer to buy his 51% stake for a fraction of what it's worth now that the $2 million hole is factored in, using the pre-fraud valuation. We get the financing, we execute the transfer, and then we inform him he's out. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity and legality. Over the next 3 months, while Michael, oblivious and arrogant, continued to mismanage Sterling Dynamics, David and I worked in secret. I leveraged my high net worth network to secure the necessary financing from a boutique private equity firm that was eager to have me as the CEO. David's firm prepared a monolithic legal binder, the ownership transfer agreement, that was completely airtight, a masterpiece of corporate retribution. The only remaining obstacle was Dad, James Reed. I flew to Chicago to confront him first. We met at an upscale, impersonal hotel lounge near the Magnificent Mile. I know what Michael did, Dad, I stated, laying out the documents on the table, the invoice, the wire transfer, the Delaware registration. He stole over $2 million. It's a felony. He's risking the entire company, not to mention your and Mom's retirement. Dad didn't even look at the evidence. He waved it away impatiently. He's your brother, Evelyn. He made a mistake. He's under stress. He'll pay it back. I'll make him sign a loan agreement. Don't go to the police. Don't hurt your brother. It's all salvageable. His automatic defense of Michael, his complete dismissal of the gravity of the crime, and his willingness to risk his own financial well-being to protect his favorite son solidified my resolve. It's not salvageable, Dad, I said, picking up the papers. It's over. He's a thief, and by trying to cover this up, you become an accessory. I'm not going to the police, but I am invoking the shareholder control agreement. I'm seizing control of the company. You can't. I won't let you, he stammered, his face turning red. I'm the majority shareholder. You were, I corrected him calmly. But you signed a document granting me the right of first refusal on any shares forfeited due to fraud. And the agreement also states that any shareholder who knowingly enables or conceals the fraud of another shareholder forfeits their voting rights for a period of 10 years. You will retain your non-voting shares, and I will ensure you and Mom are financially secure, but effective immediately. I am taking control. This is the only way to save Sterling Dynamics. He stood up, looking betrayed and furious. You're messing with the wrong family, Evelyn. No, Dad, I said, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. You messed with the wrong daughter. You taught me to be strong, to be smart, and to save your business. Now I'm using those lessons to save it from you and Michael. The final preemptive confrontation was with Michael, 2 days before the gala, at a busy, anonymous Starbucks in the financial district. A neutral, public space where he couldn't cause too much trouble. I kept the meeting short. I know about Mandel Logistics, I said, sipping my espresso, watching his eyes dart nervously. He immediately went into denial mode, trying to throw shade. What are you talking about? Are you stalking me now, Evie? Worried about your little state school princess needing cash for her classes? That was the first time he brought Sarah into it, and I felt the venom seep into my bloodstream. No, I'm worried about corporate fraud, Michael. I have the wire transfers and the signed invoice. I'm not here to negotiate a plea bargain. I'm here to tell you that at the Founders' Day Gala, I'm going to use that evidence to execute the shareholder agreement. You will lose your 51% stake, your title, your inheritance, and you will be legally liable to repay the $2.1 million to the new majority owner. Me. He laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. You have 15%. You can't afford to buy me out. You're bluffing, Evie. You're broke. Your husband can't save you this time. I'm not broke, Michael. I'm a high-powered consultant with a network of investors who love a clean, profitable company. especially when it comes with a built-in executive who can run it. The financing is already secured. The legal documents are notarized. You're done. He didn't believe me, of course. Arrogance had blinded him. He simply dismissed my warning as an empty threat, another one of my cute logistics projects. He tried to throw one final venomous barb. Don't worry, Evie. If you need a little cash for Sarah's school books, just ask me. I'll make sure my niece doesn't become a state school charity case. Wouldn't want her turning out like her mom. That was the last straw. The mockery of my daughter sealed his fate. I walked out of that Starbucks, not with anger, but with the cool, focused certainty of a drone operator lining up a target. I knew exactly where and when I would drop the bombshell, the Founders' Day Gala, a public setting where he could not hide from the consequences, making the blow doubly satisfying. The ballroom, moments after Michael's collapse and the crash of shattered glass, was utterly silent. The sheer audacity of the move, revealing corporate fraud and executing a hostile takeover at the company's annual party, was staggering. The 200 employees present were buzzing, instantly taking sides. They knew Michael was incompetent. They had secretly lauded the years I kept the machine running. Michael eventually pulled himself upright, his face a grotesque mask of shock and disbelief. He looked at me, not with rage, but with a horrifying, naked vulnerability. He was completely undone. "You can't do this, Evelyn," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Dad, tell her she's bluffing. It's all lies." My father, James, was already halfway across the room, his face a sickly gray. He grabbed the blue legal binder from Linda, the COO, and flipped through the pages frantically. The binding was thick, detailing every legal maneuver, every dollar of secured financing, and every piece of supporting evidence. David's firm had even included a full, preemptive legal brief outlining why the shareholder agreement prevailed over James's majority ownership, citing his knowing enablement of fraud as a breach of his fiduciary duty to the minority shareholders, me and Linda. "This is real, Michael," James murmured, his shoulders slumping. He looked up at me, his eyes filled not with anger, but with a deep, crushing sorrow, not for the stolen money, but for the loss of his son's inheritance and, his own control. "You never should have touched that money." "No, you never should have let him touch the company, Dad," I interjected, stepping up to the stage again, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. I looked at the employees, my core audience, to the dedicated team of Sterling Dynamics. "I apologize for the instability. Effective immediately, Michael Reed is removed from the position of CEO and Director of Finance. His shares have been legally acquired by a new holding company, and I am the new majority owner and Chief Executive Officer." I gestured to Linda, who immediately stepped forward, holding the binder high. "Linda, you have the operational documents. Please ensure Michael is escorted out and that all his company access and accounts are deactivated within the next hour." Michael let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. "You ruined me! You stole my life!" "I didn't steal your life, Michael," I said, facing him one last time, my tone flat, devoid of emotion. "I took back what was mine. You had 51% equity handed to you on a silver platter, and you chose to risk it all for a personal fraudulent gain. You had the chance to be my brother, and you chose to be a thief. You had the chance to be a leader, and you chose to be a cheat. The consequences you are facing are the direct result of your own choices, starting with the moment you decided to mock my daughter, Sarah, who has more integrity in her pinky finger than you have in your entire life. The police, who I had quietly arranged to be waiting outside, a standard procedure for hostile takeovers involving fraud, were subtly ushered in by Linda and escorted Michael out of the ballroom. His final image was one of absolute public disgrace, a once entitled golden boy being led away past the employees, who now realized they had been lied to for years. The satisfaction was immense, cold, and absolute. The consequences for the Reed family were immediate and severe. Michael lost everything. The company, his $2.1 million, which was now a debt owed to my company, and his reputation. He was forced to move into a tiny, dilapidated apartment in suburban Illinois, relying on the very meager funds he had left over, stripped of all access to the family wealth. His life of entitlement was over. My father, James, was forced to retire. He retained his home and financial security, but he was relegated to a non-voting minority shareholder, dependent on me for his financial future. The man who enabled the abuse for decades now had to witness his company flourish under the management of the daughter he had consistently undervalued. I spoke to him only on business matters, maintaining a wall of professional detachment. The family was broken, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one cleaning up the mess. I was the one directing the cleanup crew. The journey of self-reconstruction began the very next day. I immediately integrated Sterling Dynamics with Nexus Global. My plan was not just about revenge, but about creating a synergy of manufacturing and logistics, utilizing my decades of expertise to create a vertically integrated industrial giant. I closed the Chicago office and merged the operations into the New York headquarters, bringing the best of the Chicago team, including Linda, with me. I was finally the CEO I was meant to be, using my MIT-honed skills not for someone else's fragile ego, but for my own vision. The ultimate personal triumph, however, was for Sarah. The first thing I did as the new CEO was establish a new, fully funded STEM scholarship for women at the University of Michigan, named the Sarah Reed Integrity Scholarship. I made the announcement publicly, not just as a gesture, but as a deliberate, powerful statement. I didn't want Sarah's future to be secured by my takeover. I wanted it to be secured by her own merit and celebrated on a national platform. Sarah, you didn't need a bailout. You didn't need a trust fund. And you certainly didn't need to be defined by the low expectations of small-minded people, I told her during a quiet evening at our apartment, just before she left for school. You inspired me to stand up for myself. I took back the company, but you earned your future. I watched her drive off toward Michigan, the feeling of absolute freedom settling over me. I had achieved the true American dream, not the one inherited, but the one forged through intelligence, resilience, and the sheer audacity to demand justice. The story found its final, perfect emotional closure 6 months later. David and I were spending a quiet weekend in our summer home in the Hamptons. We had driven there in our black SUV, taking the long way, avoiding the crowded highways, just enjoying the sense of expansive space and the knowledge that everything we had earned. We sat on the deck, looking out over the Atlantic Ocean, the embodiment of vast, limitless possibility. David raised his glass of sparkling cider. To the Queen of Logistics, he smiled. You didn't just win the battle, Evie. You redefined the war. I just stopped being the good daughter, David, I replied, the ghost of my old self finally fading. The good daughter cleans up the messes. The CEO shuts down the operation and restructures the debt. I took a sip of my drink, reflecting on the journey. I had walked away from my family, leaving behind the shame, the neglect, and the years of emotional servitude. I now stood on my own empire, built on the solid foundation of my own competence. The path was brutal, but the result was peace. I took my shot and rebuilt my life, stronger, richer, and absolutely free. The true victory wasn't watching Michael collapse. It was the ability to wake up every morning in New York, surrounded by people who saw my value, and knowing that I was the author of my own powerful independent story. I was finally Evelyn Reed, and the corporate world was my chessboard.